You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon. Please consider joining them for $3 a month at patreon.com/The Whole Church Podcast, where you'll get extra bonus content like our Pet Peeves segment, where we ask our guests about their pets and their peeves with the church. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 1 through 3 in the New American Standard Bible. If I speak with the tongues of mankind and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give away all my possessions to charity, and if I surrender my body so that I may glory, but do not have love, it does me no good. This section of scripture is not about romance. First off, not about that. Don't know why it's at marriages, at weddings sometimes, but it's cool. But instead, this verse comes after St. Paul discusses some of the spiritual gifts in the book of Corinthians to show an even better gift, which is the love for our fellow man. St. Paul makes a bold claim that without love, faith is worthless. Josh Patterson, how do you think the church could be better united or just better in general if we focused more on love than faith?
That's a solid question. I think for me, when I think of this question, it's interesting because I wrestle with the distinction between love and faith. For me, to have faith is to show love to my neighbor and to others. So I think, but I get the point of the question. Like, a lot of the times I think we conflate faith with correct belief and think that the best way to love other people is by convincing them that our beliefs are correct. They're the right ones. And sometimes there's eternal implications tied to that. But I think for me, when I think about love and faith, I think they kind of go hand in hand, right? I think that to love my neighbor as myself is to be acting faithfully. When I think of faith, I think it involves the ability to continue asking questions and wrestling with different ideas, all in light of accepting and loving my fellow man or woman or whoever. So I don't know if that's an if that's an answer to your question.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of where my mind goes at first.
Yeah, I always find Paul's wording really interesting here, especially because, like, in John, it's like you can't know God if you don't love. So it's kind of like, how can I have faith without love? Yeah. No, right. I like that answer.
Yeah. So I want to tie the two together and be like, how am I loving my neighbor? And like, if I'm loving my neighbor well, then perhaps that means I'm acting in faith. And if I'm not loving my neighbor well, then I don't know. Maybe my faith is on the rocks today. Which probably happens more often than not, if I can be honest. But
yeah, unfortunately. Hey, everybody! Welcome to the Whole Church Podcast. We are part of a network. We are part of the Anazal Ministries Podcast Network. I am here alone, so you might see me struggle a little bit here at the beginning and outro when TJ pulls a lot of the weight. But I'm here. I'm Joshua Knoll. I am without my co-host, but I am here with one of the hosts of one of my favorite podcasts, actually. I have a list of shows that I make sure I don't miss every week, and one that I added last year was Rethinking Faith, and the host is here with me today, Josh Patterson. Josh, how's it going, man?
How's it going? You have a good name.
Yeah. I was gonna say, yeah. We are part of the Josh I. I'm part of another podcast, Systematic Geekology, and there's another Josh on there. And I'm known as Josh with the bad opinions, and he's Josh with the good opinions.
Ah, right on.
You can have neutral opinions.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll be Josh with neutral opinions. I like it. It's better than what some people call me. So Josh with neutral opinions is good. I'll take it.
Yeah. Oh, man. So, hopefully we don't get to Josh with the good or bad theologies, and everybody could just be okay with how we see things. Oh, man. But so I mentioned I have to do TJ's part. So y'all hang in here with me. I'm going to plug some things. I already plugged the network. TJ will be proud. But yeah, in the show notes, we have a link to the Amazon Ministries Podcast Network. Check it out. There's a bunch of other shows on there. I actually do another show that's part of the network now. That's Dummy for Theology, where I just go through a bunch of theological questions and leave you with more questions and absolutely no answers. It's so much fun. Yeah, don't expect to learn any like solid proofs of anything. You're not getting that. But we have a Patreon. You can go there. We have a couple bonuses a week, usually, sometimes 3. And if you want another place to get some of our bonus episodes and bonus episodes from some of the other shows we do, soon we're going to be adding a subscription channel on the Apple Podcast. If you listen on Apple, you can just subscribe to the network's paid subscription and get all bonuses from us, Systematic Ecology, Dummy for Theology, and all the other shows over there. So that's cool. Maybe check that out. Maybe not. If you're like me, you're too poor for that kind of stuff. Oh, man. And now, Josh, I have a favorite form of unity. It's a spiritual practice I do over here where it's called silliness. Yeah, because it turns out if you're goofy enough, it's actually impossible to be divided. So today's, we're starting with, that's very similar to one I did with Dr. Ord recently. Today's is, who is your favorite god featured in a video game?
Yeah, so I love and respect silliness because it embraces a bit of my personality. But I think I'm gonna take somewhat of what might be considered a cop out of an answer. I'm gonna say Alexander Ovechkin is my favorite god featured in a video game. He is the captain of the Washington Capitals, which is an ice hockey game. And he is the greatest goal scorer in recent NHL memory. So I would say Alex Ovechkin is a hockey god. And we'll consider him my favorite god. But if I don't know if Loki is represented in any kind of video games, but if Loki is represented, he is my backup answer. I'm a fan of Loki, the god of mischief. So
I might have to cheat on my own question. There's a video game called Folklore. It was like early PS3. I don't know if they made any sequels or not. But one of the lands was the land of the gods. And every single creature, because it's like basically Pokemon, but paranormal, supernatural kind of stuff. All of the creatures you catch or you can catch in the land of the gods, they're all my favorite. They're so cool. Just so freaking cool. And that's my cop-out answer. Yeah. If we have to go with real answers, I'm going with... I'll probably go with Odin from some of the more recent God of War game stuff. Those are fun. But...
yeah, God of War was like the only place I knew gods to be active in video games. And I was like, well, I haven't really played them too much, but I play the crap out of NHL. So Alex Ovechkin does well for me, at least, you know. And in real life, he seems to do well. So
yeah, there's a lot of cool gods in like Elder Scrolls stuff too, but they're a little too creepy for me. Like I'm really vanilla. Like I'm just so boring. But also, I really thought about, because Kingdom Hearts are some of my favorites, so I thought about just like pulling like Hercules or Hades. I was like, I feel like people just get tired of hearing me talk about Kingdom Hearts, and then here I am talking about Kingdom Hearts anyway. So, oh well.
Well, solid answer. I'll take Kingdom Hearts. I have fond memories of playing Kingdom Hearts on PS2 in my early days as a wee lad. So I'll take the I'll take the nod.
Man, yeah, because I grew up in like a super conservative home, it was kind of beyond me to think that things could exist without Jesus. So I think whenever I played that first game and you have King Mickey like in Kingdom Hearts with all the darkness, like I think I always just grew up thinking, okay, so King Mickey is Jesus in these games.
Yeah, it's a solid. All right, there we go. Now, and I'm awaiting your book on the subject. So
yeah.
Christology and Kingdom of Hearts.
yeah. Well, I mean, now that I'm older, I'm like, I know it wasn't intended to be that, but also it kind of was. Anyway. Yeah, you'll have to wait on the book. I can't give away too much here.
Yeah, but... don't sell out yet. Just wait till the book comes out. Yeah.
Well, we actually invited you on the show a while back while we were recording a Patreon episode for our other show. So Systematic Ecology has this show, Drinks with TJ, where TJ just interviews people about beverages with zero discrimination. I think most recently they were talking about ginger ale versus ginger beer. I know they did a whole thing about Pepsi, And back, I want to say it was like February or January, we talked to you about kind of your history in brewing. And then, I was like, I really love your podcast. And it was just so much fun interviewing. I was like, we got to have this guy back. So we figured it out. I'll be honest, guys, this week it was a struggle for both of us. We both changed the recording of this at least once. But we're here. And we know you have a pretty wild backstory. For our listeners who haven't heard you over on Systematic Geekology's Patreon, they should go sign up and give us money. Moving on. No, I'm just kidding. But for listeners who haven't heard that, would you mind kind of just sharing some about your story, like your faith journey, your experiences with the church and, out of the church since then?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll preface it by saying that I think the listeners should sign up and give you money.
Yeah.
But so I'll try to do a kind of like a quick overview. I grew up as like almost like a Creaster, to use some Christianese language, a Christmas and Easter kind of Christian, until my parents attended this thing called the Walk to Emmaus, which was like this spiritual retreat for adults. And that happened probably when I was like late elementary school, like 5th, 6th grade. And then started going to church on a regular basis. I grew up, started in a Methodist church. Then my parents discovered the wondrous, beauty of early 2000s contemporary Christian music, super fun. And started going to the Southern Baptist Church down the road. So I grew up there, or I was going there for a while, late middle school, all through high school. A wrinkle in that came when my brother, Jordan, came out when he was in 7th grade, as gay, and my family was kicked out of the church. They literally told us, the head pastor said, "You are no longer welcome here."
Oh man,
bye. So we left that church, and that's a whole nother story. But just to kind of follow my trajectory, I ended up staying within the church world. Went to a Christian college when I graduated high school, Messiah University, which maybe some people know. It's in Pennsylvania. When I graduated from Messiah, I started working for Youth for Christ, which is like a parachurch organization. I did Campus Life, which is a program for like high school students. And basically, like, I started a little club in a school and was like, hey, Jesus is a cool thing. And so I did that for a year and then ended up moving to South Florida. So I'm from Maryland. So I moved from Maryland to South Florida, where I became a teaching pastor at a church in Boca Raton. They're a church that, kind of like Voldemort, shall not be named. Although I just said the V word, so you might have to edit that one out. But that was a less than stellar situation.
Yeah.
I was there for about 8 months, and when I was there, I experienced verbal, spiritual, emotional, borderline physical abuse. Ended up leaving there, hopped over to a little Methodist church where I became a high school pastor, or actually youth pastor, forgive me, because I did like 5th grade through high school there. And then ended up, that church had issues of its own, but ultimately ended up moving back to Maryland, where I was a high school and young adult pastor at an amazing church called Seneca Creek Community Church. So if anybody's in Maryland, it's a beautiful church. I have no qualms with them, but the damage was kind of already done, so to speak. And I was in therapy. I was, interacting with a spiritual director at the time and really asking a lot of questions, kind of wrestling with, my past experience weighed heavily on me. Some of the kind of nerdy questions I was wrestling with weighed heavily on me. Today it's popular to call like deconstruction. So I was like experiencing deconstruction as a pastor, plus this like crazy experience I had in my past. I didn't know what to do. Ultimately, I ended up walking away from vocational ministry after like 8 months of discernment with an amazing spiritual director. And now I'm a brewer. So I started bartending first, long story, but ultimately ended up in brewing. So now I brew beer for a living and podcast on the side and consider myself theologian adjacent. And that's
Yeah.
that's like the short, quick and dirty version of my story.
Man, I have a lot I want to go back to, but before I do, what's do you have a faith community now, or like if you do, where is that? Because I know, I mentioned your Rethinking Faith. I love that podcast. I know you talk to a lot of like Thomas Ord and other people who I would consider Christians still. Is that what's your faith community like right now?
Yeah, so I'll go on the record first, just for listeners, maybe put them at ease a little bit, to say I still consider myself a Christian or a follower of Jesus. Current faith community though, so like honestly, when I stopped working in the church, I stopped going to church. Yeah. And it was about a year and a half. And then there is a beautiful, so I live in Baltimore City now with my wife, and it's where we bought our first house. And you can see a beautiful Episcopal church from the front porch of our house. It looks like a medieval castle, like
nice.
That kind of thing, right? Like the big stone building, like the stained glass windows, etc. Gothic architecture that you expect in Baltimore City. So I did check them out a few times, and had a positive experience there. A lot of healing. It was cool. The service was a lot different than what I was used to as like a non-denominational pastor. The priest, Monique, she's amazing. She is a gay Black woman, which was very different for me compared to what I grew up with. So that was a really cool experience. Most people there, like I feel like I brought the age average down by like at least 40 years. Yeah. So there wasn't much community there for me, although I liked the service. I found a lot of what I considered my community at Full Tilt Brewing, where I used to work until they recently went out of business. I found community amongst the staff and also the regulars there. And I have a buddy named Jace. He's a mentor / friend of mine who's a pastor and likes to argue with me about ecclesiology. And whenever I would describe this community as my faith community, he would, kind of give me crap for it. But we broke bread together. We definitely drank together. We celebrated when there was things to be celebrated. We mourned when there were things to be mourned. We danced together. We sung together. We shared life together. And that was like a very helpful community for me that I found after losing the community that I had in the church. Because that was always my favorite thing, was the community that I had. So I'm still kind of searching for that, if I can be honest with you. My buddy Nick, who was the owner of Full Tilt, recently invited me to attend his church, and I did. And the people there are super nice and cool. And so I'm still kind of searching out, like, what does it mean to find a faith community where I am accepted and loved for who I am. And so that's I'm kind of in limbo, so to speak, or purgatory, if that word's allowed to use. But I'm actively searching for some kind of faith community, because I that is what I miss the most. So
I instead of us tag team teaching, I'm gonna say teaching instead of preaching, listeners should just read Ephesians 4 and keep in mind that the entire letter to the Ephesians was just Paul explaining to them what church means. I'm just going to leave that alone, because a lot of what you said, I was like, is he just like loosely quoting Ephesians 4? Or, you're talking about like singing, dancing. I was like, but yeah, I mean, I find it really interesting. Right now I'm attending a Lutheran church. It's weird to me that a lot of the more, I think the one where I attend kind of seems to be a little bit more middle of the road, which is probably where I would consider myself. But it's strange to me that a lot of the extremely conservative, what I think is even toxic environments in some churches, I'm not saying every conservative church is toxic. I'm talking about specific groups of churches. Hopefully people know what I'm talking about. It's weird that a lot of them seem like they have the youngest church members compared to some of the more like uber progressive liturgical churches where it's all like older people. And I'm like, what? it's so weird because it just does not match like overall demographics on what people believe. And I'm like, what? Why is church world so backwards? That's just a side note. I just think it's funny. But I also just want to say Rev Covery is another podcast I really like everything they do over there, and what Sarah does, just helping people kind of work through some trauma and stuff and how to deal with it. I like how I'm throwing out resources before we get into some of the other stuff. So I'm going back.
That's good stuff. I love Rev Covery. I've had fun conversations with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that too. I know she's been on your show, and I think you've been on their show before too. And I'm just like, oh man, that's like a crossover, like old Disney Channel status. This is great. But I'm kind of curious, and I hope this isn't too personal, but you mentioned back when your family was at an SBC church, they just kind of told y'all to leave when your brother came out. And maybe this is just me being the more emotional one here, but I'm like, why wasn't that the moment that you just stopped dealing with church people altogether? Because like, even if they're right, that's just so unloving that I'm like, I don't want anything to do with those people.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't have a good answer for you because kind of what I defaulted to was like, basically in my mind, I was like, these people aren't what they told me Jesus stands for. And so for me at the time, instead of being like, oh, now all church sucks, all Christians are the worst, I like these people aren't understanding the things that they're preaching because, you know, it doesn't align with what I've been taught. And so I didn't have that. Surprisingly, isn't the thing that gave me a crisis of faith. I just assumed like, they're not handling this great. Because like at the time, even though I never, and like to my parents' credit, my parents never, even though I would say I grew up in a more conservative Christian evangelical home, my parents never shunned my brother. Actually, so both of my brothers are within the LGBTQ community. Never shunned either of them, never kicked them out of the house, never, you know, told them they're going to hell, etc. They only just loved and supported them. And I got to watch my parents wrestle with my experience of my kids is not aligning with what I've been taught in church. And so I got to kind of watch them interact, and they always chose their kids. So like,
nice.
Kudos to them for that. So like for me, I had my parents did good. And yeah. Even though me being the more nerdy individual, I never had an issue with like my brother being gay. I had like theological questions in my mind that I kind of like bracketed out and was like, well, this is my brother. Like, what else do you want me to do? You know what I mean? So like, I didn't allow that specific instance to characterize the whole church. It got more difficult over time, but like, yes, I actually haven't thought about that, why that wasn't the thing that kind of like, you know, I think N.T. Wright would be sad when he found out that my brother getting kicked out of the, you know, church for being gay isn't what, you know, ultimately set me on my quote unquote deconstruction, but rather reading his book, Surprised by Hope, is the thing that did that, which I don't think was N.T. Wright's intent. So.
Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and go there then. Why was that book? What did it?
Yeah, well, it broke my eschatology and my understanding of what it means to be saved. Because growing up, I was taught that the only thing that mattered was my ethereal soul that somehow gets to, you know, float off into wherever heaven is, and that's what ultimately matters. But then, you know, I started reading N.T. Wright, and he was talking about, well, no, actually, the Bible is much more beautiful than that. It talks about heaven and earth being reunited together once again, and it's about, you know, Jesus, the resurrection of Christ was not some one-off event, but rather the first fruits of what's the promise for, you know, all of us, and we're all going to be resurrected. And there's this beautiful, like, somehow physical heaven thing on earth, and like that's what the kingdom of God is. And that just like broke all of everything I was taught, because I was taught like dispensational eschatology about like the rapture and like the earth is terrible, et cetera, et cetera. So N.T. Wright just kind of opened me up to a different form of the faith. Yeah. And I was like, oh, well, I thought that all Christians believed that the rapture was a thing, and that, you know, the earth doesn't matter and our bodies don't matter, only our souls do. Like, I thought that was normal. And then T-Wright was like, well, maybe not. So
yeah, wild. I think interestingly, I think my version of that is I'm a crazy person. So after I kind of tried to leave the faith and just kind of realized, ironically, I was trying to read the Bible to prove the Bible wrong. And then I was like, I need to learn to read this better so I can make sure that it's wrong. And then I ended up across some like Pete In stuff and some like the Bible as literature, which is funny because it was like a textbook. It wasn't even like it wasn't progressive, conservative, or anything. It's just a textbook. And I'm like, okay. And then somehow I went from that to kind of rethinking my relationship with the Bible and went, I need what the early church thought about the Bible. And then I was like, well, the early church was mostly Catholics. We don't like Catholics except for like these three people. And I ended up reading all of Augustine's City of God. And I was like, we're not doing this racial justice thing. We're not doing political stuff for the kingdom here. We're kind of against this, and that. I was like, I think the church stopped being the church. And ironically, I went against the church for a while. And then somehow I came back around to, no, the thing isn't to attack the church. The thing is to help the church be the church again. And that's how we get Whole Church Podcast. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah, well, I love that. And I think based off what you're saying, I think is what you're offering is a prophetic voice. Because, if I can use that kind of language, because I know that can be difficult. But when I think of prophecy within Scripture, I'm not thinking about like, oh, they're predicting the future, like kind of like crystal ball kind of thing, but rather the role of the prophets was to remind the people of God, the body of Christ, the church, etc., of who they were. And when they were doing stuff that was stupid, they'd be like, hey, if you keep doing stupid stuff, stupid things will happen to you. And so like the role of the prophets is to speak to not because they're like anti the church, but they're like, no, I love this group of people. I love the body of Christ. I love the people of Israel. However you want to phrase that, and say like, we're not doing the thing we're supposed to be doing. And so I think this prophetic critique is something that has been lost within a lot of, not all, but within a lot of American evangelical Christianity. And like, I think shows like this and people who are willing to kind of speak truth to power, to use that language, are speaking prophetically in a biblical sense.
Yeah. No, it's weird because I feel like a lot of times when people think of stuff like that, they think it's all preach fire and brimstone, tell them we're doing wrong, and then divide and start over kind of stuff, which, man, this is getting really nerdy, but that's sort of like the John Stott and Martin Lloyd-Jones big debate that they had. Like, should we start over or should we revive or should we, change what we are? And it's funny how like now the church's big sin is what? Sexual sins. That's the thing we want to harp on. And what is your personal sins and how do you personally get salvation? But if you look at like the first few hundred years of the church, the big sin is dividing. The big sin is leaving the church. The big sin is not being together as one. And that's why all the creeds were so important early on. Man, sorry, we got really nerdy on everybody.
Yeah, drop it like it's hot. All right.
Now, I did want to, because I'm sure we mentioned deconstruction and prophecy and being a brewer, and it's like, we threw out all of the big like no words. So I want to kind of backtrack a little bit and help our audience get to know you a little bit better. Just kind of, ironically, this is always like our challenge round is like we go through, or you're allowed one sentence per question. We're allowed to do no follow-ups. But the ultimate challenge round, I made this one originally for Trip Fuller. I used it one other time, and I was like, I want to pull this back out for Josh, see what he does with these questions. So, one sentence or less. You think you're up for it?
Yeah, I'm up for it, but I don't know that I can compete with Trip. But I'll do my best. And if if Trip listens, then Trip, get ready to get wrecked, homeboy.
Yeah. Also, I don't know or Skip are both perfectly fine answers, because that's how I'd answer probably a lot of these. Okay, who or what is God?
One word, love. A sentence, God is the nothing less than personal, creative, generative principle of all that is.
Ooh, some big words. I like it. Okay, what is salvation?
Salvation is the awakening to the reality of who you truly are, a child of God.
Man.
And there's implications that follow that change your life.
I hate not being able to do follow-up questions. This is why TJ has to do this part. I can't do this. What is the significance of incarnation?
So for me, as a panentheist, not pantheist, but panentheist, incarnation is the whole game. Dang it, one sentence is crushing me. Incarnate. All right, I'll do it in a Christian way. Incarnation is important because it represents the truth that God decided to not be God without us.
Ooh,
Incarnation.
I like that. Okay. What is the significance of baptism and the Eucharist? You have to do both in one sentence.
Baptism is super cool because it's a symbolic way to say, like, hey, we're all in this family together, and Eucharist is a form of resistance because it's a table that allows all people to come together and unite around one core event, namely Jesus, and say, this is what it's all about.
Oh, like it. What authority, if any, does Scripture have?
Scripture, dang it, I'm going to get in trouble with this one. Scripture has the authority that any given faith community gives to it.
Man.
So it's an agreed upon authority.
No follow-up questions suck. What authority, if any, does tradition have?
Tradition has the same authority as Scripture. It's an agreed upon authority based off the faith tradition, and what authority they give to it.
that was pretty funny. Okay, what are your views on destiny or predestination?
So I am a process thinker / open and relational theologian is maybe a more lay person way of saying that. So I believe that the future is genuinely open, and therefore God does not know the future because it does not yet exist, so God therefore cannot know it. And you and I and everybody else and all of creation is actively writing history together with the divine, whether we give into the divine lore for good, beauty, true, love, etc., or we give into the less than stellar side of things.
Oh, man. Can God change? Well, that's an easy one for you.
So I would say God has, in its essence, experience binate, which is language I steal from Tom Lord, which means God's experience or God's essence does not change. The core of who God is does not change, but God's experience does. In process language, this is the difference between the primordial nature of God and the consequence nature of God.
Ooh, man. Okay, what do you love about the Bible?
Yeah, so I love that the Bible is a collection of voices coming together, wrestling with faith, and inviting the readers or listeners into the conversation and encouraging us to wrestle with the deep questions of faith in a way that inherits the tradition that we've been given, in a way that is faithful, but also moves beyond it in a way that makes sense for faith today.
How do we relate to God?
Close your eyes, take a breath. There is God.
Okay, last one. I have to change a little bit. How many of the 7 sacraments do you hold to, and which ones? I can list them out if it helps.
I'll be honest, I have to look at the 7 that are listed because I don't know the 7 sacraments. So I can't do this in one sentence, so forgive me, but I'm down with baptism. That's pretty cool. Confirmation is cool as long as we're not brainwashing children. The Eucharist is my favorite thing. Penance is helpful because I think it's true that humans have an enormous propensity to F things up, and when we can be honest about that, penance is helpful. Anointing of the sick is really cool because, like, I think Jesus was kind of all about taking care of the marginalized and the sick are involved in that. Marriage is super cool because I love my wife. And holy orders, I'm not quite sure what that means, but sure.
For those wondering, he did use a bunch of semicolons, so that was one sentence.
One sentence, yeah. Reynolds said it was like a academic one, how they just cheat and use semicolons and write 3 pages worth of text, and you're like, how is that one sentence?
We one of the earlier ones we did with this was with Father Jonathan of the Orthodox Church. And he out loud said semicolon hyphen. No, it was pretty great. Yeah.
My grammar is not that good. So Father Jonathan did way better than I could ever hope to do.
Well, he'll comment down below and just punctuate your sentence for you. It's fine.
I appreciate it. Thank you,
Father Jonathan. If you're listening, we do expect that from you. Oh man. I had so many of those I thought was interesting. Now that it's over, I do want to mention, because you mentioned the time thing. The other podcast I just started, Dummy for Theology, I do one of when even is God or something like that, or what even is time. That's what it was. So the philosophical theory of the unfolding time, if that theory of time's correct, then process relational theology has to be correct, I think. Because, future doesn't exist yet, past exists, the present has a bunch of potential futures all caught up in one block that's here and now. So that's always fun. I actually really like philosophy, and I had a lot of fun in college when I was like, wait a minute, I don't even have to say Jesus. I could just think about whatever weird stuff we think of. Perfect.
Yeah, philosophy. And also, like, if you haven't interacted with him, R.T. Mullins is kind of like, when I think about time questions, like, he's the guy I go to. He's super kind. I'd be happy to introduce you to him. Sweet. R.T. Mullins is kind of like the time guy, so to speak.
Okay, that sounds fun. Yeah. Okay, so I wrote his name down. I'll try and get his information from you later.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure he's like definitely not an open theist and stuff, so he disagrees with me, but he's fun and likes talking with people. So
that's fun. I always like those conversations where it's like I don't fully agree with you, but man, this was good. That's like I'm not an open and relational theologian. Personally, I kind of lean more towards optimism. Omnipotence, and it was really fun because we did a conversation with Dr. Ord about his newest book, and he's one of my favorite people to talk to just ever. And I gave him a heads up. I was like, hey, now that I know that we could just talk, I'm just going to get to a point and we're just going to start going back and forth and just letting things be. It was so much fun. But another podcast I really like is your podcast I mentioned before, Rethinking Faith. If anyone hasn't checked it out, they should check it out. It's like in parentheses too, so it just looks like even the wording looks cool. And like it's actually ironically the only podcast sticker I have on my computer. I have 4 stickers on my computer now, and like 3 of them are mental health, and one of them is Rethinking Faith.
Hooray! Rethinking Faith.
Yeah, it's like a reminder to myself 3 different times that hey, it's okay to not be okay, and then the other one is Rethinking Faith. I'm like, yeah, it's fine.
I dig it.
Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a brain. It kind of goes with everything else still. It's fine. But part of why I really enjoy your show is because even though I'm just kind of leaving some of the conservative stuff, I'm not like in progressive groups a lot of the time. So kind of get to be introduced to a lot of people I probably wouldn't be introduced to otherwise. So that was really cool. And you're just easy to talk to. All of your guests seem like they have a really easy time talking to you. So it's a great time. And I just I like that your show isn't just here's the answers, here is my way. And it's a lot more conversational and actually just kind of grappling with what is true, grappling with like the things of God and stuff. Could you kind of fill our listeners in on like, what is your podcast about in your own words and what inspired you to start it?
Yeah, sure. So the podcast has definitely kind of shifted and evolved over time. I originally started with a friend of mine named Andy, and the idea was like, yo, Andy, you and I are on like opposite sides of the theological spectrum. Let's start a podcast where we can have honest conversations that doesn't result in like, you're dumb, no, you're dumb, and like just try to have like, honest conversation. And so that worked until it didn't. Andy eventually left the show after about 30 episodes and was like, yeah, dude, like based off my denomination, I can't be involved with this kind of thing, or I'm not going to be able to be allowed in my denomination. So
Yeah.
that kind of shifted, and it kind of just turned into, and this sounds super selfish, and perhaps it's because it is, but like it kind of turned into like Josh's journey of faith. And it kind of resulted in me talking to the people that I wanted to talk about and talk to, and asking the kind of questions that I wanted to ask. And ultimately, like today, I feel like Rethinking Faith, what I hope Rethinking Faith is that it's a podcast that encourages open and honest conversation where we can bring our full selves with no shame or, whatever, and tries to offer a variety of perspectives and ways of thinking within. Originally, it was just like the larger Christian faith, but even now, like I'm down with like interfaith dialogue. Like, how can we answer these questions in a way that doesn't just look like the very small sliver of Christianity that we were given growing up? So ultimately, I'm just trying to help people who went through the same kind of not great stuff that I did, and try to be the kind of person that I wish I had in my life 10, 15 years ago. And kind of invite people into that journey. So it's deep, it's raw, it's authentic. It's episodes don't agree with each other, they kind of, perfect. So it's that kind of thing. It's ultimately mostly like, here's Josh's own theological journey, do with it what you will. But I'm trying to invite people into that journey, and hopefully if I go deep enough inside myself, other people might find themselves there too. And that's my goal.
Yeah. So is it like rethinking faith as in like you're rethinking your faith, and that's kind of the journey?
So that's definitely a part of it. I mean, it definitely, I was thinking through things, and when it started, I thought that I kind of had all the answers and just wanted to prove my friend Andy wrong. But in a way that was, like good and honest and wholesome, whatever. But as I kept going, I just kind of, the way that I look at things is that we're all in process, wink, wink. Yeah. And that the person that I am even currently in this moment is different than the person I was when we first started this conversation. And so I'm interested in that journey and that experience, and how the divine is interactive in and through each moment. And then offering people like, hey, here's fun conversations about a variety of theological topics, whether it be theodicy or atonement, soteriology, whatever. Like, how do we interact with those things as we take our experience seriously, as we take our relationships seriously, as we take our tradition and the Bible seriously, and kind of go from there. So it's just I don't know. I'm on a journey of becoming, is the way I say it in the intro to the podcast, and I think everybody else is too. And I just want to be honest about my journey in hopes that maybe some other people find themselves there, and it kind of gives them a little refuge or a place where they know that they are seen, loved, and belong.
Yeah. It kind of makes me think of one of my earlier questions, because I know you talked about kind of your faith community being a lot of the people that go to the brewery and stuff too. And I think in my own experience, a lot of the times that I've had what I would consider where I did the most churching has been like when I worked at like Domino's or different places where like people were genuinely interacting because they weren't in a building where they felt like they had to answer things certain ways. And I think right now I'm at a point, oddly enough, where like I go to a church building, I do church there, I do the liturgy, all that stuff. I partake in the Eucharist, but I think my real faith community is kind of become like this podcast community. And it's funny for me doing whole church, because it's like I have some people that are like wildly different that are all part of this like thing. And I'm like, yeah, I know there's some questions that I'm probably going to go to Trip for. There's some people I'm probably going to message Thomas Ord. Actually, Russell Moore is on my email list for different things, and I'm like, I just have like these people who are like not the same at all. And I'm like, why is my community this weird online like mosh posh? But I love it. I think that's like one of the biggest advantages of podcasting is you just get to meet some really cool people. Yeah. No, I met you at Tripp's thing. So yeah. And
yeah, at Theology Beer Camp. And I mean, I'm with you, dude. I think like that's been such a gift of podcasting is I've got to talk to some really amazing people and make some like really cool friends. Like, I mean, I wouldn't be friends with, you know, people that I look up to and still like on a regular basis, I'm like, why the heck are these people even my friends and why do they talk to me? And I'm, you know, people like Trip Fuller and Dan Koch and like both of them, mean more to me than like either of them will ever know. And people like Tom Ward and my buddy Jace Broadhurst and people like, you know, like Sarah Heath and Sari and, you know, Tony Jones. These are all people that like, for whatever reason, didn't just write me off like a bunch of other people did.
Yeah.
And so like, I've got to meet all these cool people and then also like interact with other cool people. Like, you know, I've interviewed Rob Bell. That's crazy. I've interviewed
That's
like
awesome.
Tom Ord Tom Ord is awesome. Like I love Tom and we're like, Tom went from like being an influence in my life to a friend. But like, Tom Wright is who I was also going to say, like NT Wright, massive influence in my life. Got to interview him. Like so many cool people. And that's kind of like the secret reason I like podcasting, you know?
Yeah. It's like really like we say we do it for other people, but honestly, like
definitely like I'm selfish. I'm like, dude, you're telling me that I get to talk to like X, Y, and Z. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I could just just book Pete Enns and like he'll just agree to talk to me for 40 minutes. Like that's
right,
awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, it's awesome.
I think I went about crazy and like almost like, you know, like when you're dating somebody and you just like really overthink how you respond to a text. Trip texted us once after a podcast we released. Dude, it was me and TJ talking about pirates on the Geek Show and was like, you guys need to do an episode all about Veggie Tales, the pirates who don't do anything. And like, it was a hilarious text, but in my head, I'm like, Trip just texted me something that had nothing to do with like a project working on or anything. Like I have to answer like cool and be like, yeah, man. Yeah, bro. What's going on, friend? You know, like, how do I do this?
No,
it's just so funny.
Yes, 100%. I very much empathize with that. Yeah. I feel you.
Oh, man. Speaking of which,
crazy.
Do you have any favorite interviews or like episodes you've done that you like, if someone asks you where to start on Rethinking Faith, you're like, definitely check this one out?
Yeah, I was looking at the, this is one of the questions I was like most worried about because I don't have a good answer. The way I would say it is like, if you're interested in Rethinking Faith for whatever reason, I would just like pull up the show on whatever podcast platform you like listening to and then look for a topic or a person, you know, maybe like the guest or like maybe the title of the the episode intrigues you and just like start there. Because it's not like episodic in the sense where it's not like, oh, you have to listen to the last one to get this one. But really it's more so like just kind of random. I don't really have a reason or a method as to why I put out episodes when I do.
I mean, that's mostly the case.
But I mean, I have some really fun episodes I've done, like not to harp on it because you already did, and he's going to like, you know, build his ego and whatever. But like, I always love talking to Trip. I like to joke with him and tell him and Dan, and I'm like, yeah. So whenever I talk with Trip Fuller, it makes me want to be a Christian. Whenever I talk with Dan Koch, not so much. But that's like so mean, and Dan does not like when I say that. So I don't often say it, but like it's just a joke. But anything with Trip or Dan, I've loved it. Like done stuff with Tom Ward. I mean, I have episodes where I started crying.
Find the Rob Bell episode.
Like, the Rob Bell episode is a thing, but like I don't know. It's hard because I feel like every episode that is most recent is like my favorite, and then next week is another one. So it's hard, and that's like a really stupid answer. So forgive me, but I don't know. I just
probably answered the same way. It's fine.
Yeah, I just want people to find the one that like they're interested in. Like go look and be like, oh, this one with, you know, whoever sounds really cool. Like Heather Hamilton. Wow, this sounds fun. Let me listen to this one. Whatever. It doesn't matter. So
Yeah. I know one of my favorites was when Sarah was on the show, but I always wonder is like if it was like recency bias, because like I had just met both of you not that long ago, and I was like, oh, I know these guys. It's always so like, I don't know, something for me, it's always really cool when you hear people that you know and kind of get to learn them about them a little bit more on a podcast, because like you don't have to do that awkward thing of like, hey bro, so what's your testimony? You know, like you don't want to do that, but it's like I like hearing people's origin stories, I guess.
yeah, that for sure. And I do have like an origin story episode where I haven't listened to it in a while, but there definitely is like a Josh's story episode where my former co-host Greg interviewed me. So current Josh might dislike former Josh. I don't know, but it exists.
Yeah. But oh man. So our show, we are mostly concerned with like church unity stuff. And I guess we talked a lot about like how we view Ecclesia and how other people view it, maybe a little bit different. Do you think there's a good way for those who are still like part of, I'm trying to think of the right way to say it, because I don't want to be like the institutional church, but you know what I mean? Like part of the church in that sense can better reach out to people who have gone through like church hurt, some deconstruction, who aren't attending a building church that we would still consider part of the church. Yeah. This terminology is getting really weird. Hopefully you know what I mean, but like, is there a way for people who are still a part of the institutional church to reach out to Christians who aren't going to church without it being like, hey, come back, you need to be in a building, but like in an actual helpful way?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And it's a difficult question to wrestle with, because the way I would answer that is, you know, I'll tap into my quote unquote pastoral side and say that I think it's going to depend on the individual. Because I think one thing that sometimes, not all, but sometimes we have a tendency to do is write people off who are walking away from church and be like, oh, well, they don't know the real gospel, or they don't, you know, this, that, like it wasn't, you know, Jesus that hurt people. It was just like silly people, whatever, etc. So like, I think escaping kind of that mindset is really helpful, and recognizing like, no, there are genuine, legitimate reasons that people are stepping away from, you know, the church today. And then kind of just allowing people to have the way Rob Bell says it is, let them have their trip. And this can be really difficult. I mean, especially for me, because I'm the kind of person that's like, when I see a problem, I want to fix it. And so when I see people like, oh, like, well, I don't know about this, or I don't know about that, and I'm like, well, your theology just sucks. Like, I want to fix that. But I think rather allowing people to have that experience and recognize that all of us are on, to use more language from the podcast, like all of us are on our own journey of becoming, and all of us have to do that journey ourselves. We can't, that journey can't be forced upon us. So what I think is more interesting and compelling and helpful is allowing somebody to walk away, not judging them or condemning them for it, but rather maintaining friendship and genuine relationship that isn't predicated on you believe like me. And then maybe one day they'll return, you know, like think about like the prodigal son story, but also being comfortable with like maybe one day they won't. And I know that's difficult, but also in my perspective, it's cool because I'm like a pluralist, but like, allow that to be the thing. And I'm more interested in, how are you loving somebody? How are you responding to somebody in genuine relationship? And how are you making sure that person knows that they are loved, that they belong, and that they're accepted for who they are? So I'm more interested in that than arguing with people about their beliefs or saying that their church hurt doesn't matter or something like that. So that's kind of where I would go. I don't know if that's a good answer, but it's a direction, perhaps.
I mean, I like it more. You know, I don't see there's something that like one of the things Francis Chan points out in the book Erasing Hell that I really like. He points out that Jesus never talks about hell to the sinners or to poor people. It's always either like the religious people or the rich people. And I was like, oh yeah. And it's interesting how like when Jesus meets people who are like kind of getting away from religion, you know, they didn't have church yet, but like his response was always love and care and to care for them in some way. So I feel like that's Kind of sounds like you're trying to be like Jesus.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. There's recently I was teaching my buddy Jace, who I've mentioned a few times so far, does this thing called Tuesday School, which is like so Jace is like PhD in Old Testament, degree in like hermeneutics, etc. Wicked smart dude. And so I help him teach this class ever so often. And basically what happens is Jace is within a specific tradition, not going to name it, where if he says certain things, he'll get in trouble and get fired. But if somebody else says it and he interacts with it, it's all good. So I come in and Jason's like, hey, can you come? Like, yeah. Anyway, so recently I was, somebody asked me a question and it like kicked on like Pastor Josh mode and I started preaching. And Jace was like, whoa, Josh, you're sounding like a Christian right now. And
that's funny.
I kind of let it go at the time, but in my mind, it reminded me of this scene from Pirates of the Caribbean where somebody tells Jack Sparrow, like, whoa, you were actually telling the truth? And he was like, yeah, I do that an awfully lot. And yet somehow nobody ever believes me. And so like, I like made a meme of like Jace telling me like, Josh, you're sounding like a Christian. I was like, yeah, I do that all the time. And yet somehow everyone's always surprised.
Oh man. Those are some of my favorite movies. Those are good times.
Yeah.
Disney and Pirates references aside, if y'all want to hear more of those, I will always make them at Systematic Geekology. Any chance someone wants me to talk about pirates, just please let me know. Any excuse, I'll take it. So are there any questions that you would like people to ask you more often that I haven't asked yet?
Yeah, I think often depending on the audience, I get written off as like a crazy progressive liberal or something like that. And so I wish one thing people would ask me more is maybe like I'll even use super like evangelical language, like what does your personal relationship with Jesus look like and how has that influenced your personal theology, philosophy, ethics, etc. Because I think a lot of the times it's assumed that because I'm more like progressive or etc. in my thinking that I've automatically just said like middle finger to Jesus, I'm out, I'm going to do my own thing because it makes me feel good, etc., etc. But I actually think the reason that I am the way that I am today is because of my relationship with Christ. And so I wish more people would ask me about that. And not just assume that I'm like some crazy idiot because, I just give into my feelings or something like that.
See,
not that you did that, but not that you did that. But I'm just, I wish in general people would ask me that.
I feel
like, to be clear, I feel very welcomed and happy here. So
yeah. Now, I don't think this of you particularly, like I feel like in my mind though, in general, I almost chalk up like more progressive theologians to being like the more thoughtful ones. And then the other side I think are being like super emotional, which it's a little funny to me. But now that you say that, how does your experience with your personal relationship with Jesus impact your philosophy and theology and all that?
Yeah, so for me, ultimately, I was bridging on and have on many occasions, and maybe even still today on my bad days, border on like agnostic at best. But I found some of the Christian mystics, and also I've read a lot of some like Buddhist texts, specifically like the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh, and these things have aligned with my experience of the divine. I've done a lot of like contemplative practice, centering prayer, these kind of things that I found amongst the Christian mystics, and have found that my experience of the divine has led me more towards the kind of theological positions that I hold to today, but has also opened me up to the possibility that like, hey, maybe I shouldn't hold my theological positions with a clenched fist, but rather more with a more open hand, and recognize that I don't know what I'm talking about, but I can do my best. And the experience that I have with the divine through things like centering prayer, through community, through interactions with other people, through conversations like this, are all ways that I get, I have the privilege of interacting with God and the divine. And so, I try to lean into those experiences and see what I can learn.
That reminded me of a book I want to recommend, but I'm terrible at Buddhist terms, so I might need your help. But it's a book that is a Buddhist interpretation or commentary, I guess, on the Gospel of Mark. So John P. Keenan, the book is The Gospel of Mark, a Mahayana reading. Did I say that correct at all?
Nailed it. All right.
Sweet.
I think you did get that. I mean, that's how I would have said it. So maybe we're just both two stupid white guys doing our best. But we have positive intentions, so we'll go with it.
It is really interesting, though, to hear a Buddhist and how they interpret the book of Mark as someone who, A, isn't Christian, and B, is of a completely different philosophy and stuff. Well, not completely different, but different philosophy and stuff. So I really enjoyed
big time. And like one of my favorite Buddhist authors is rest in peace, he passed away recently, but it's Thich Nhat Hanh, and he did an insane amount of work of interfaith dialogue, specifically between Christians and Buddhists, and did a lot of peace work, trying to be like, hey, maybe killing everybody all the time is a bad idea. But he has some really beautiful works. Like he has a book called Living Buddha, Living Christ that is phenomenal, and he does a really good job of not taking a tradition and collapsing it into another, but rather respecting both, like, here's the Christian tradition of the Christ, here's our Buddhist tradition of Buddha, etc. And like, how can they partner together and respect the differences, but also celebrate the similarities? Like, it's pretty cool. So
I just I feel like we could do like a whole like book segment of this. I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna let you that recommendation sit, and I do want to do one thing we do at the end of each episode, or near the end of each episode, I should say. We like to ask our guests to just provide a single tangible action that listeners could go do that'll help better unite the church today. And that can just be any faith community, maybe interfaith even. Is there an action that you would tell people that you think is just more unity engendering that they could go do right now?
Yeah, I would say go find the religion that you're the most afraid of.
Ooh.
And learn about them. And not from, so like if you're a Christian, don't learn about it from a Christian perspective, but actually, like, for example, let's take Buddhism. Go read Buddhism from a Buddhist perspective, or go read Judaism from a Jewish perspective, which I think Christians should be doing anyway. But or like go read about like Islam from like a Muslim perspective, because I am firmly convinced that until there is peace amongst the religions in the world, until there's an acceptance and an agreed upon like relationship, there's not going to be peace. And so like step out in faith and go read about a religion that frightens you, because I think if we can understand and have compassion for people who are different than us, that think different than us, that look different than us, that goes a long way. And I'm not saying you have to become a Muslim or a Jew or a Buddhist or whatever, but just go read, study, talk to people who look and think differently than you, because I think it'll go a long way in the world to bring peace. Because if we have understanding, we can have compassion, and I think compassion is important. So that's my tangible step.
Yeah, and I would say ministering is a lot more than just like trying to make people believe the same as you, and you can't really minister if you don't know the people you're ministering to. And if you want a halfway step to his thing, I also think it could be useful. Read a story written by someone of a different religion, because then you don't have to like go all the way to like the scary I'll learn about Islam place, and you could just learn like I love G. Willow Wilson, writes my favorite comic books of all time, the Miss Marvel Kamala Khan series. Also writes a novel, The Bird King. Phenomenal stuff. You don't have to be an expert of Islam. You're not going to suddenly become Muslim. You could read it, understand some of the history behind her people, their fears, also kind of get a really cool fantasy story and just kind of see what people are like. Because I also just, fair warning, if someone, this is like one of those weird things that I believe. I think if somebody was like Muslim and just read a book about Christians, whether, I'm like, I feel like a lot of times, you're not going to get what Christians are like, so I always am like, maybe do both of those things. Maybe like learn about the religion and then read about people who are actually doing it, because sometimes like things are different, cultures are weird.
Nah, 100%. And I think even for me, like that's been the thing that has helped me the most. Some people would say this is a negative thing, and I respect that. But interacting with people that look, think, and feel differently than I do has been so beneficial in my life.
Oh yeah.
And so like reading authors or storytellers, poets from different religions, and trying to see where are these people saying similar things, but also where are they different, and not being afraid to like, again, celebrate the similarities, but also have a genuine respect for the differences. Because I don't want to just say, like, I'm a pluralist, so I don't want to just say like everybody's secretly a Christian. I want to genuinely respect the differences, which I know can be scary, but because I genuinely think until the world religions are willing to cooperate with one another and seek things that are beautiful and good and true, then I don't foresee things getting any better anytime soon. So I'm here for that conversation.
Yeah, man. And that's whole nother can, but I'll say that that's a beautiful thing. Everybody should do it. And hopefully we could talk more about that some other time, because that might take us another hour. But one thing we do as we're wrapping up is just kind of our God moment segment. We just talked about a moment where we particularly experienced or thought about the divine in a moment, I guess. Mine is going to be really, really weird this week. I just watched Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and it was so good. But I thought this one was going to be different for me, because when the first two came out, I really related to Rocket, because I was kind of a jerk to a lot of people. And it was one of those like, oh, I'm like that. And then like whenever he's had that moment at the end of the second movie of like, oh, they loved him anyway, even though he was a jerk. And like, I was like, oh yeah, that hit me home. And I was like, this one's going to be different, because yeah, I'm not like that anymore. It wasn't. Without any spoilers, me and Rocket's story somehow are exactly the same. I straight up cried and I was like, this sucks. But in that moment, weirdly enough, I'm going to show my Pentecostal colors. On the way home, I was listening to some of the songs that were played in the movie and thinking about his experience and then reflecting on my own experience. And I straight up was speaking in tongues, listening to The Dog Days Are Gone. I'm over there like having a whole Pentecostal movement in my car. And I'm like, this is not even a Christian song. But it's fine. It's cool. No biggie. Yeah. So Josh, have you had a moment where you have particularly felt the divine recently?
Well, I love your moment. I can't compete with speaking in tongues in my car to a secular song. It's pretty good.
So random.
My like really good friend Marty would very much appreciate that. He's a worship pastor in the AOG. So
nice.
Yeah, cool dude. Former co-host of my podcast. But let's see. I'm going to try to do this in the moment, so forgive me. I'm going to try to reflect like within this moment, think back today when I experienced God. And I think this morning I experienced God when I was greeted by my pets. When I let them out of their cages this morning, and they were super excited to go downstairs and get breakfast and play outside. And I think I experienced God today when I saw my wife for the first time, when she came downstairs after I'd woken up before her. And I think I experienced God today when I met new people at the brewery that I visited today for a Barks event, which is a rescue here in Baltimore that rescues animals. And I think I experienced God in the conversation that I had with my wife on our way home from that event. I think I experienced God in the moments leading up to this conversation when I was like, why the heck am I so nervous for this conversation? I think I experienced God during our conversation today. So yeah, I don't know, that there's a few options there, but
yeah, it was really funny. Thomas Ord was on a couple of days ago for our listeners, but
go Tom Ord.
Man, he was like, he did his whole thing of like, we experience God in every moment. So I guess to me, God moments just when I like really particularly saw God, not that he was there anymore or any less than usual. And it was funny because I'm like, that's pretty much my co-host TJ. That's like his whole philosophy. He just doesn't say it that well. He's just that's hockey happened. God was there.
Yeah, and I would predicate all of that by saying like, yeah, I agree with Tom Ward. So there we go.
Yeah. Tom, TJ, Josh, they get it, man. All the moments are God moments, which is what makes this segment so easy for me.
It's awesome. It's like if you want to go back to like old school, think of like, I think of like Practice of the Presence by Brother Lawrence, who was like an early church mystic, to use that word, but his whole bit was like, if you want to sum Brother Lawrence up real quick, like he would do this practice where like in each and every thing that he was doing, he would stop and pause when he remembered and recognize like, this thing that I'm doing on behalf of the divine.
Ooh.
So like for me, it's like when I'm at work and I'm like brewing beer, if I stop and pause and be like mindful in that moment, I can recognize like, oh, I can do this thing to the best of my ability for the divine. Or my favorite way of talking about it is like, I'm going to screw the story up, but in my readings, there was like a dude, like a guy, a monk, I don't know, whatever you want to call him, a dude, because it's my way of talking. And he like worked in like some kind of like Christian organization, school, etc. And every day, basically his job was when people would come to visit the monastery, he was the person that would greet them and interact with them and like, help them find where they need to go. And this monk, his prayer every day, or what he reminded himself was every time a new person entered the monastery and looked for help, whenever they would say like, hey, I'm here for help, his response was always, here I am, Lord, how can I serve you? So in each moment, he recognized the divine in the other and then sought to serve God, the divine, Jesus, etc., however you want to phrase it, within the other person. And so in that way, practiced the presence of God in and through all things at all times. And I'm like,
oh,
I hope when I brew beer, I'm like, here it is, God, what do you think?
Oh, man. That's good stuff. Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode and you want to hear more from Josh, make sure, again, check out Rethinking Faith. I think it's everywhere this podcast is, so check it out. And if you feel like it, you could share this episode with a friend, a cousin, or as TJ likes to say, an enemy. I don't know why you have enemies that you're sharing podcasts with, but if you are, great, good job. We do prefer you share it with cousins, though. They tend to be the most receptive, I think. But make sure you go to our Patreon, check out our pet peeve segment. We talk about pets and peeves and all that kind of stuff. You can also go to the Anazal Ministries Podcast Network website down below to find other shows like this one. If you want to hear more of, I'm trying to remember the slogan. It's like Christian podcast that asks the big questions. Yeah, that sounds right. So if you enjoyed the show, awesome. Come back next week. We're going to have some live recordings about politics and faith. Then we're going to have another live recording the week after about how we most experience God, whether it is in communion or in our prayer closets, that whole thing the Bible says. Then Dan Koch, we mentioned a couple times already on this episode, is going to be on the show. He does the podcast You Have Permission, and we're gonna talk about what the church is with Dan. What does that word mean? Then finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be joining us. Even though he's not aware of it, he will become aware of it and then join the show. It's going to be great. Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Come back next week, as we'll be airing some of the live podcast we were able to do at our convention, the Every Tribe, Denomination, and Tongue Convention in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Remember, you can always sponsor our show at patreon.com/The Whole Church Podcast.